Okay. Right, Taryn, do you want to just tilt your camera up a little bit there? Hi, Sharon. Welcome, and thank you very much for the session we're doing tonight. Our first of our Rental Thursdays, which is going
Yes.
to be that's going to be the third Thursday of every month. And just so those know the format, we'll always have a particular topic or particular issue that we'll cover, and then it'll be open to a question and answer session. And we're looking at about 30 minutes for the show. So I'm setting the live on the various streams. This is streaming live to realestatetv.co.za, which is our YouTube channel. And it is also being streamed live on Facebook on various pages. So hopefully people will be asking questions, and I'm just going to point that out before you start on your topic, Taryn.
Okay.
Depending on how people are connected, they will be able to post questions. So the questions can be posted to Taryn if you're connected to the AirMeet stream. There will be a chat facility on the right-hand side. And I'd like to welcome those of you who've already joined us, and there are lots of people still joining as well. So on the right-hand side, there are two facilities to ask questions. The one says chat, and the other one says questions. The best one to use if you do have a specific question is going to be the facility that says questions. There's also a facility to raise a hand, but I wouldn't like to interrupt Taryn while you're introducing your topic. So with that, you'd like to go ahead. Rentals, short-term letting, long-term letting. What's the best under the circumstances in the market? Over to you.
Thank you, Andre. Well, that is it's a very good question, and it's commonly asked in the rental market by landlords as well as tenants, actually. So I'm going to run through each the long-term rentals. I'm going to run through the short-term rentals because they're two very different ways of renting your property. So let's start with a short-term rental. With us at Chaz Everett, we do a long-term rental. When we consider a long-term rental, we do a minimum of 12 months, up to a maximum of 2 years, and obviously with an option to renew for a third year and a fourth year, etc. So I'm going to cover that when I get to the long-term rental. So let's just go through short-term rentals first. Short-term rentals is anything ranging from a day to a week, to a month, and actually all the way up to about 6 months. That would be your short-term letting scenario. Now, on that side of your short-term rentals, landlords that prefer to do the short-term rentals are those that are preferring to do either holiday letting or they are business lets. So in other words, for corporates where there's someone coming here for a 3-month contract or a month contract. So the whole setup of a short-term let is very different to that of a long-term let. Short-term lets are very sort of high-paced, very fast. It's financially can be quite rewarding because you can ask for a higher rate because you will be working either on a day rate or a month rate or a 3-month rate. So it'll be definitely a different scenario to that of a long-term, which is a more stable income. But that being said, it's a higher risk profile as well because you are getting a high flow of tenants coming through. So your checking and your security checks have to be quite on the ball. And you will also have to have a look at your costing around that. So the pros, I would say, around your short-term lets is it's a flexibility. It's very flexible, and it's a higher, obviously, rental return. So if, for example, you want to use a property for a period of time for your own use, you have the flexibility to do so and can then just put short-term rentals in for the rest of the time. Or, as I said, you can do on a short-term with paying per rate per evening. The cons of this is that your occupancy risks are a real thing if you're doing that as something that you're doing as a return. You need to make sure that you have your occupancy in place and that you're not running with 2 to 3 days without occupants. And obviously your costs are higher. So you're not always guaranteed of occupancy on a short-term let. So you're working with more of a flexible market. And this type of rental requires more financial commitment, as the unit needs to be furnished, preferably. It needs to be equipped. It needs to have basic services such as Wi-Fi, television, and your maintenance costs will be higher as you constantly have new tenants. So your wear and tear on your items in your unit needs to be on top form all the time. And obviously with a high turnover, people don't tend to take care of the items as readily as they would if they were staying in a long-term let. So that being said, the short-term rentals, landlords often do these themselves. They go and rent these out through Airbnb, or there's a various different other options in the Cape Southern Suburbs area. There's Cape Stay, where landlords can join and they can actually send through photographs and advertise through this portal. There's Capsule, that's another short-term holiday letting or 3-month letting. There's also something called CapetownVilliers.net. They also cater for this kind of a rental. And then the holiday apartments, that's also another .com, which is another sort of arena where landlords can do their short-term renting and letting. For some landlords are highly skilled at doing this. They do this as part of their sort of portfolio. But then the landlord needs to be in and around the area. You need someone to check them in, check them out, because over and above the short-term rental, there's the check-in and the check-out, which needs to be done correctly. So that would be your short-term rentals. At Chayes Everett and normally your bigger companies such as ourselves and all the other agencies in the southern suburbs, we concentrate more around a long-term rental. Now, a long-term rental, as I said before, is when we consider a long-term rental of a minimum of 12 months. So usually your tenants will come and they'll apply for a 1-year rental. Sometimes we may get, especially in the current climate, where a lot of properties are going into the market to sell. They're not selling, and what's happening is sellers are deciding to rent it out for a year. Your tenant comes along and they prefer to sort of secure themselves for 2 years. So we can legally do a 2-year agreement, which is 24 months in your first, sort of in the first lease agreement. And then there's an option to renew for a 3rd year and a 4th year with a set escalation up front. So for a landlord, it's a guaranteed income that they can actually sort of forward a plan on. And then if we do our escalation set and negotiated from the get-go, they can also be guaranteed more or less that that's what's going to happen when they renew for a 3rd, 4th and 5th year. We try to get that done up front, so there's no arguments down the line. So for a long-term landlord, this is more of a stable income for both a landlord and a tenant. What comes along there with the long-term rental is ensuring that your management of your property is top-notch. And I found that long-term rentals, landlords use management companies such as ourselves to actually assist them to manage it on a monthly basis, so they can work that into their costing as well. So their rental will be X less all the costings that they need to pay out and what they're left over with. Okay. And the most important pro in this has been able to secure a good tenant, ensuring that you have a good tenant up front. So it's not basically just putting it out there and getting any tenant to occupy. It's by doing proper screening processes to get a good tenant in place. And if we can get that mix ready and stable, the landlord can be assured that he's going to have a good rental with a solid income. The cons on your long-term rentals, obviously in light of the current market situation with COVID and all the other things that are happening around the world. Your cons here could be that, we could screen a tenant completely. They're 100% on the books. Their characters are great. They've got excellent references. But as we know, in 3 months' time, due to the economy, that company could close, or they could be retrenched. We found that those kind of things would be a con, really, to be aware of from the very get-go. So we can only do a certain amount. And as we know, residential rentals is risky. So if you're going to be doing residential rental or commercial, you need to understand that there's not risk-free. So that could be a con. The other thing that along with that is delinquent tenants. So you could also have a situation where it becomes quite onerous to evict a tenant, because there are legal processes around that. There are procedures that you need to follow. You can't just go there and change locks and sort of kick them out and switch off electricity. That's completely against the law. You have to go through a set process. And your vetting process needs to be done 100%, in actual fact 150%. So landlords must understand that a vetting process, some landlords prefer to do their own rentals, and that could be a con because they don't have the full knowledge of what is allowed and what is not allowed. There's more to a rental than just drafting a lease agreement and placing someone in your home. You need to be aware of the Consumer Protection Act, the Rental Housing Act, FICA laws, and how your contract actually is drawn up in the first place, because you can draw up any lease agreement that you may find is suitable for yourself, but you must understand that if it does go to a court of law or if it does land through the rental housing tribunal, whatever the law is, it's going to override any lease agreement that's been drawn up if it's CPA, within the CPA, if both are individuals, and actually to an extent on CPA, non-CPA compliant agreements. So in short, my suggestion is, in the market that we're in now, for stability and security and a lower risk, I would definitely suggest a long-term rental as opposed to your short-term rental. So that's my sort of, in a nutshell. We could talk about it for hours, but in a nutshell, that's what I'd like to just bring the attention to everybody about.
Can I just ask you, Taryn, with a person who does want to do short-term rentals, obviously by its nature, short-term rental is going to involve the property being furnished, at least.
That's right.
But if you're doing holiday letting, then obviously it must be more furnished. It must be fully supplied, right down to knives and forks and things. Would that not be expected?
So on a short-term let, you've got to have a look at those, because they are short-term lets. No one's going to move into a property for a day or two and bring all their furniture. They're not going to stay there for 3 months and bring all their furniture. It's too much cost. So normally those kind of people have their stuff in storage. So on short-term lets, you're going to have to prepare your property, gear it to actually people that are coming in for shorter periods. In other words, you need everything in that property. And as I mentioned earlier, inclusive of Wi-Fi access, inclusive of your water, your electricity, all these factors need to be looked at on a short-term rental. So it's more like running a hotel, really, if you think about it. You've got to think of all the ingoing inspection. Your inventory needs to be done on the ingoing and on the outgoing, and then you've got to work your deposits around that. So your deposit needs to be taken relative to a furnished property so that you can cover yourself for your damages. So there are a lot of things to think of and prepare yourself as a landlord before you just willy-nilly go and put a tenant in place. There's also the security factor. With holiday lets and short-term lets, you need to do security checks. You need to have someone that's coming into your property that is relatively screened and checked that's okay for that tenant to move in. So these are all things that need to be thought of. A long-term rental is more unfurnished.
Okay. Can I go to one of the questions that are coming through?
Yes, please.
I've got a question here from Sally asking what Chas Everett specifically does to vet a potential tenant. What is the process to make sure that that is a suitable tenant?
The vetting process is quite an extensive, exhaustive process. So basically it starts with the actual agent meeting with that tenant and taking them through a property. At that time, our rental agent, sales agent, will actually start to get a character feel of that particular tenant. That's very important. So from the very first viewing, a relationship is started between the rental agent and the tenant, and sort of with experience, as our agents do have, they get to have a gut feel around a particular tenant, which is incredibly important. That's the first process. We also do certain things on that initial viewing, is that we look at the behavior of the tenant at the first viewing. Do they arrive on time? Do they keep on changing appointments? Are they really difficult before we've even taken them to the property? These are all sort of things that you need to look at as a whole before we even get to the application process. Now, we do accept every application. Every person that goes and views is perfectly allowed to apply. So we have a few pages of an application form that needs to be filled out completely, which includes the occupants. We need to know exactly who's occupying. We need to know how many dogs will be on the premises, and that all the things that have been advertised for is covered in that application process. That tenant also needs to supply 3 months bank statements, salary slips that can actually be vetted against that bank statement, as well as all the FICA documents. We need to know where that person is currently living and the proof of address of that person. We need to have references from contactable references from family members, friends, and from previous landlords. That is incredibly important. And then obviously there's the financial side that needs to be vetted carefully. Usually how we do as a rule of thumb is that a salary needs to be 3 times that of the rental that's been required. And those processes are put through something called the Tenant Profile Network, which is a network that covers all the rentals in the system. So if anyone's rented before, they will be in that TPN or that Tenant Profile Network. So those persons' details are put through the system, and it gives us a credit report. Sometimes the credit report can be 17 to 18 pages, which gives a sort of a whole holistic report on that person, all their credit that they've got across the board, any defaults, and so forth and so on. And that whole report is compiled by our administration, handed back to the agent, who then will forward that information to the landlord in its entirety, which is highly private and confidential. And the landlord is then able to make an informed decision. Not us. They will make that informed decision with what we have provided if they are happy to continue. And if they're not happy to continue, we carry on. So it's definitely a relationship between the landlord and the agent, that we work around the landlord's needs, and then we make the decision. So,
Taryn, thank you. I've got a question here from a Martin who's living up in Johannesburg, and he says he acknowledges the fact that he went through a bad patch, and he does have issues with his credit reference. These things have all been sorted. I don't know what things he's talking about, but these things have all been sorted out. He wants to know what your advice would be in terms of disclosing his situation to the agency or to the landlord. What your advice is?
Honesty. It's always, when you do we deal with that. The sign of the times is exactly that. Not everyone at the moment, and actually, a high amount of people are having the same issues. So it's not abnormal or different. From the get-go, if you do your full application, disclose where you are and what you've done to rectify that. Usually you can contact the institutions you're dealing with, and they can provide you with a letter to state that these affairs have been put in place. It may not have been removed off the actual credit profiles, because they take forever. And with all that information that your agent is able to provide to the landlord, you'll find that landlords can be very reasonable, provided they get all the information up front. And we will still present that application. and we'll motivate it accordingly to what we've received in honesty from that tenant. It's a fair way to go around.
All right, Martin, hopefully that's good advice for you. I've got another question here that's come through from an Althea who's in Port Elizabeth. Althea, thank you for joining us. So Althea generally wants to know or wants to get some advice about pets. She's finding it very, very difficult to rent a property with, I don't know what, it's a cat or a dog. Althea, maybe you can just comment there, although I suppose generally does it matter. What is the situation? Is there any specific advice you could give her on that issue?
You see, that unfortunately has always been an issue. Most people have animals. So when we rent out a property on behalf of a landlord, we always mention that to them that mostly, I would say 95% of people have animals, whether it's a cat or a dog or, so we always try to say to the landlord, listen, if you can, rather allow for animals to be included into the agreement. And then we'll just maybe increase the deposit slightly to cover for those incidentals that an animal may cause. And if you don't do that, it's going to minimize how many tenants can actually apply. So it's not a very good thing for a landlord. It's going to minimize his tenant database, really. Unfortunately, however, if a tenant is renting through a landlord that's in a sectional title, or if they're in a secure estate and the sectional title has certain body corporate rules whereby they're saying there are no cats allowed and there are no dogs allowed, or the security estate have laws like that, or in actual fact, if a landlord doesn't want animals because he's had a bad experience, it really is up to the landlord to make that decision as it is his property. So unfortunately, we have to go around what the landlord wants and what he does. But we can always motivate. Remember, some landlords will say, I don't want any animals. But I mean, let's say you've got a tiny little toy pom and it's not a bull mastiff. We can always say, listen, it's a toy pom. It's a tiny, and the landlord may say, that's fine. So we deal with it case by case. So don't be put off. You can always try.
Right. Okay. I've got a question here from Rose in Cape Town. For a long-term let, if a tenant cancels the lease 6 months before the lease expires, can the landlord get his money back from the agency that he paid the commission to?
No. So basically how that works, to just let you understand, it's a very good question. That's the big question that all landlords will ask. When we've got two sorts of agreements. We've got a managed agreement and we've got a procurement agreement. So basically, let's talk about a procurement agreement. What we offer our landlords is a fee to market his property, to bring tenants to view his property, and included in that fee is drafting up a lease agreement, which is done through, we've got leases that are done through attorneys. They are CPA compliant and they are compliant with all the acts in the country. We provide and we draft that negotiation. We put that lease together for that landlord, as well as the credit checks, etc., the ingoing inspection, which could take a day or could take 3 hours. All these things are included in that commission that a landlord pays to the agent that he's asked to let his property. Should the tenant along the way give a 20 business days notice, for example, which he's allowed to do, the landlord can then in turn go for the tenant or apply to the tenant for financial damages that the landlord suffers as a consequence to that short notice. It has to be justifiable. So it can't be just because the landlord felt like charging the tenant that they can just go ahead and do it. It has to be proven and it has to be justifiable. In other words, a justifiable damage to that landlord is that he's already paid an agency to find that tenant, place that tenant, and they've been paid. And that's the right of the landlord and the tenant. The landlord can then go back for a pro rata portion from the tenant to cover that damage that he's incurred for that tenant, and that's legally allowed. That is the time when the rental commission that was paid plus the VAT will be divided over the period of time, so it'll be over 12 months, and if there's 6 months left, that landlord can charge that against the tenant, and usually that can be agreed to and removed from the deposit. It's actually covered in our lease agreement, and that is standard practice and that is allowed. That is a quantifiable damage, and those cases have gone to the rental tribunal on many occasions, and they have been awarded. If that answers that question.
I think it does, Taryn. Another question here to do with deposits. You mentioned the issue about the pet. If you have a pet, you can maybe increase the deposit. Actually, I want to ask my own question on that. Do you ever take a pet deposit, by the way? A specific pet deposit?
You know, specifically question, we actually make it far easier, and we just take a double deposit, which incorporates many items, and it's written to. So some agents have a pets deposit, they have a utility deposit, and they split up the deposit, and at the end of the day, when you add it all up, it comes to a double deposit.
Okay.
So if a landlord...
The question that's come through here is whether in the current market a double deposit is more favorable for, well, obviously a double deposit is more favorable for a landlord. Maybe I can just turn that question a little bit and just ask you, is it sort of 50% of the time that you're taking a double deposit, or is it actually the norm now, or how frequent is this actually happening?
In our area, it's the norm. When I say our area, in the southern suburb, it's a normal procedure that most tenants that are going out looking for properties should be aware of at this point, because I can guarantee that a lot of our agencies are all requesting a double deposit. One has to understand that this is a landlord's property. It's his business. It's not personal. The landlord is renting out a property, and he needs some form of a guarantee that, first of all, the tenant can afford it. So from that point, a tenant is required to pay a double deposit plus the first month's rental in order to secure their house. And there's a reason around that. We need to find out that the tenant can actually afford it. And I know it sounds incredibly harsh, but we need to protect the interests of the landlord as well as the tenant. We need to find out that they can. And that deposit, the tenant mustn't feel that, oh, well, I'm paying a double deposit. Remember, that deposit is secure for the term of the lease. It has to be invested in an interest-bearing account, which is accrued for the tenant. So look at it as a savings account. The landlord cannot just go and use that at will. It needs to be drafted in. So yes, it's the norm, and that's what's been asked at the moment. Definitely.
Okay, just on that, there's another question here from Lynn about the interest rate that would be charged. Actually, the question is specifically, can the tenant specify the interest rates, and can the tenant ask for a statement to check the interest?
100%. Now, that's a very interesting question, because, you know, it's been a hotly debated subject for many years, and it actually hasn't been put into concrete sort of law whereby there's a certain amount of interest that's been
Oh, we seem to have lost the connection to Taryn. So, Taryn, I don't know if it's an Eskom issue and you've lost your power, but we've lost your signal. There, are you back again?
Hi.
Sorry about that.
I don't know if it's me or... Okay, so I don't know where I left off. I was talking out there, so let me... Okay, so the rule of thumb is that we put it into a normal savings account at the moment is gathering interest between 2.5% to, I would say, 3%. That's a normal savings account. That's how we work it around. So when a landlord invests the deposit, he needs to have some form of interest that's been accrued, and he can place it into some form of interest-bearing account. However, every lease negotiation is different. That tenant may say, well, listen, I can actually invest that deposit in one of my accounts at a higher rate, and if you're going to invest my deposit, I would like you to rent it, put it in at a 3 or 4%. That can be discussed up front, and then we can help the landlord find an investment account that can meet that need within realistic terms. But at the end of the day, as long as it's an interest-bearing account, there's no law set that the landlord has to put it at what the tenant wants it at, as long as it's an interest-bearing account. But as I said, that's negotiable. Every lease is negotiated.
Okay, Taryn, we're coming up to the half hour. Can you believe that's half an hour gone past so quickly? Can you maybe just tell us what topic you're choosing to cover next month? Have you thought about a topic?
Yes, I think the next topic we need to discuss is exactly that, is the deposits, is the whole issue around deposits, what can be done, what can't be done, how damage has affected deposit on outgoing inspections, 20-day business notice, so everything revolving around a deposit, which is the biggest question for all tenants and obviously for landlords. So I think we'll do that in the next one.
All right. Well, I think we're going to bring today's program to a close. Thank you very much indeed. Sorry about that little technical whoopsie that we had. Otherwise, it seemed to go okay. And looking forward to the next session, which is the third Thursday of every month. I don't have a calendar in front of me, so I don't know what the date is, but it's the third Thursday, which obviously will be in April, the third Thursday at the same time, and it's broadcast on a live stream on Facebook on various channels and on realestatetv.co.za. If you don't have the particular AirMeet link that we are using as well. So thanks very much indeed. And last word.
Yes, can I just add something? If anyone's got questions that weren't answered tonight, we do have an email address that you can just send us queries. The email address is info@caperentals.co.za. Am I right, Andre?
Yeah, info@caperentals.co.za, and then will you choose if it's to answer them directly, or would you hold that over to the next meeting?
Well, they can send the questions. We can hold it over to the next meeting. But if there are any people that would like an urgent response, I'm quite happy to.
Great. Perfect. All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.